Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at product manager day in the life in India. Effectively, if I have to talk about the very high level definition of how my day looks like, almost 70% or more than 70% of it is going to be meetings. You interact with a lot of stakeholders, both internal and external, and then the rest of the 30% is where you get your hands dirty, do some technical work, do some writing work. So what I've done for this specific video is I've categorized each of the activities into 5 major buckets. I'm going to walk you through each of those buckets, and then I've sub-segmented activities in each of those buckets, and I've kind of also talked about the amount of time or percentage of time I spend on that specific activity throughout the day. So let's get started. Before I jump into the video though, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to the channel for the best product management. I'm very active across both YouTube and Instagram. So if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments or drop a message to me on Instagram. I'm going to definitely write you back with the answer. That in mind, let's get started. So like I mentioned, I've sub-segmented each of these activities in 5 major buckets. First is going to be stand-up calls. Second, discussion meetings. Third, it's going to be customer and user meetings. Fourth is going to be strategy and catch-up meetings. And 5 is going to be focus work. Now, if I talk about the percentage of time I spend on each of these activities, for stand-up calls, I spend approximately 10% of my time. For discussions, I spend around 30% of my time. Customer and user meetings, I spend 20% of the time. Strategy and catch-up meetings, I spend 10% of my time. And then focus work is 30% of my overall time per se. Let's take the first category, which is the stand-up calls. So if I were to talk about stand-up calls, I'm going to sub-segment this in engineering, design, and growth again. But before I jump into these buckets, let's just quickly understand what these calls are. So effectively, if you talk about stand-up calls, these are consistent not only in product, but also across every team. So if you work in growth, you work in engineering, you work in sales, you'll still have those 15, 10, 20 minutes calls in the morning. There are 2 primary type of meetings a product manager would have. The first is the engineering and design stand-up, where you talk about what's done yesterday in development specifically or design. Then there is what's blocked, primarily to understand if there are any blockers with respect to development. So effectively what happens is each of the developer would walk you through these 3 things, right? So what's done, blocked, and planned. Now, the reason why it is important for a product manager to attend these meetings is first he gets to understand what's happening in the product, right? What happens a lot of time is because the engineer has completed his work early, or the engineer is blocked on something, he may pick up something else. And often it's likely that the developer who's actually developing the product may not be aware of the pretty of things. These items themselves, the things to build, are allocated by the engineering manager. So it's very important to have these daily meetings to understand the status of each of the features, sub-feature stories, user stories, or epics per se. Next, we talk about growth stand-ups. Again, similar, but the important thing here to look at, and I encourage you to do it in engineering and design stand-ups too, is to look at analytics, the number of people came to platform, looking at the whole user journey from acquisition to activation to retention to revenue and then referral, especially if you're working in a B2C space. So the idea is you get a gist of the numbers, you understand if there are drop-offs at any point in the journey, and if there are, why these drop-offs occur in these point of journeys. Ideally, these metrics should also be discussed in the engineering stand-ups, because if the users are dropping off because the payment, all of that needs to be prioritized when it comes to putting in the engineering effort needed. Then you also kind of discuss what's done, what's planned, and what's expected. Typically, the type of audience on this call would be associate growth associates, growth analysts, product analysts, etc., etc. Next category is the discussion meetings, which is where you typically would spend 30% of your time. Broadly, there are 3 or 4 categories here, right? Subcategories here. Effectively, the goal of this meeting is to get on a deeper level discussion. So on stand-ups, you just merely get like a very high level understanding of what's happening where. And it makes sense because the name itself implies stand-up. So you need to stand for 10 minutes and be very quick with respect to the updates per se. But in the discussion meetings, the idea is to dig deep on the problem itself. So let's assume that there was a 30% drop off. Then you need to understand why that happened. So while that might be prioritized to figure out the root cause of the problem, you need to jump on the call with your team, understand what might have gone wrong, and then effectively work together with your team in order to solve the problem itself. So one would be the root cause analysis type of things that you would do in this discussion meetings. The other would be specifically for say marketing and go-to-market. You'll talk about new feature launches, email campaigns, dashboards, do design reviews like UX changes, design feedback, customer journey, etc. planning, for example, feature changes, bug fixes, urgent P0 items coming in the sprint, feature definition, and feature walkthrough to the engineers. Then finally, you could also look at, say, sales kind of things where there are new customer requirements and the sales team would want to discuss these requirements with you. So all of these items would typically fit in the discussion meetings. These would take 30% of your calendar daily. So, and effectively, these are the meetings that, drive most of what happens on a day-to-day basis and also affect your final OKRs per se. So these are one of the most important meetings for a product manager. Next category of meetings would be customer and user meetings. You typically spend 20% of your time here. What the idea here is that you go on the call with your sales, you understand the kind of requirements a customer has and what the persona of the customer is, what value proposition we're pitching to the end users. If there is a need, you would also be involved for the demo per se. So effectively you do demo calls, then there are calls where you primarily go on these discussions in order to understand the user better, their day-to-day better. So these would be user research calls. And then finally requirement clarification. For example, if a sales team brings a requirement to you, you would go on this call effectively to clarify the understanding on the requirement per se. Let's jump to the next category, which is the tea and catch up meetings. The idea here again is to kind of more from the review side of things to kind of align with your manager or team per se. You speak to your manager, team, or even business review teams like CEOs, CPOs, etc., etc. Effectively, you give them updates about the product. There would also be meetings where product strategy team would come up with vision discussions, roadmap discussions, etc., etc. Then finally, you talk about the focus work, which is, I think, one of the most important, but also one of the rarest placeholders in your calendar, where you effectively spend time thinking deep or doing some technical hands-on work with respect to your day-to-day, right? So the items involved here would be roadmap building, grooming, or deep thinking, which is again understanding user problems. So you would do user research, then you go back, reflect on that user research to understand the insights that were derived off of those user research points. You would also typically spend some time reading the product or creating the PRDs or business requirement documents. You would also do requirement analysis and build flows to achieve that specific requirements, including mockups, etc., etc. So this is how typically a day in the product manager looks like. Again, these are like the category. A real calendar of a product manager is like super chaotic. A lot of times you'd receive meeting invites middle of the night, early in the morning, primarily because it's a very chaotic role per se. But then again, it's rewarding from the perspective that it gives you like complete freedom with the product and also great amount of experience running the product per se. So this has been my experience. I hope this video was able to kind of give you the gist of how a day in the life of a product manager looks like. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to drop those in the comments. But otherwise, I hope this video was able to deliver the value. Consider subscribing to the channel, drop a like on this video, share this across with a friend, and I'll see you in the next one.